There's someone in your life right now who irritates you intensely. Maybe it's a coworker whose arrogance makes your skin crawl. Perhaps it's a family member whose neediness exhausts you. It could be a friend whose irresponsibility drives you crazy, or a stranger on social media whose opinions fill you with rage. Whoever it is, just thinking about them probably creates a visceral reaction in your body. Tension in your chest, heat in your face, a clenching in your gut. Your immediate interpretation of this reaction is probably straightforward. This person is annoying, wrong, frustrating, or toxic. They're the problem. If only they would change, if only they would behave differently, if only they would stop being who they are, then you would feel fine. This seems so obviously true that you've probably never questioned it. But Carl Jung discovered something that completely inverts this understanding. He observed that the intensity of your reaction to another person reveals far more about you than it does about them. As Jung wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This isn't just a nice sentiment about tolerance. It's a precise psychological principle about how projection works and why other people trigger us so intensely. Jung understood that we don't see people as they actually are. We see them through the filter of our own unconscious minds. And when someone triggers an intense reaction in us, it's almost always because they're touching something in our own psyche that we've repressed, denied, or disowned. They're not creating the feeling in you. They're activating something that was already there, waiting to be triggered. This is one of the most difficult truths in all of psychology because it requires taking responsibility for your own reactions rather than blaming others. It's much easier and more comfortable to believe that your irritation is simply a reasonable response to someone else's unreasonable behavior. But Jung would ask, why does this particular behavior bother you so intensely when other people might barely notice it? Consider the person who becomes enraged by others' arrogance. They see arrogant people everywhere, in their workplace, in their social circles, in public figures they've never met. They feel morally superior to these arrogant people because they themselves are humble and modest. But Jung would suggest looking deeper. What if the intense reaction to arrogance is actually pointing to disowned arrogance within yourself? Perhaps you've had to suppress your own confidence and self-assertion to be accepted. Maybe you learned that expressing your own worth or taking up space was dangerous or unacceptable. So you developed a persona of humility and modesty while pushing your natural confidence and self-assertion into your shadow. Now, whenever you encounter someone who freely expresses the very qualities you've repressed, you experience intense irritation because they're living out the part of yourself you've had to deny. This doesn't mean you're secretly as arrogant as the people who trigger you. It means you've disowned some aspect of healthy confidence or self-assertion, and seeing it in others reminds you of what you've lost. The irritation is your psyche's way of saying, pay attention. There's something here that belongs to you that you've been refusing to acknowledge. Or consider the person who is constantly irritated by others' neediness. They pride themselves on being independent and self-sufficient, and they feel exhausted and frustrated by people who seem to need constant support, reassurance, or attention. But Jung would suggest that this intense reaction might indicate disowned neediness within themselves. Perhaps this person learned early in life that having needs was shameful or burdensome. Maybe they were praised for being so independent, while their genuine needs for support and connection were ignored or rejected. So they adapted by pushing all their neediness into the shadow and building an identity around self-sufficiency. Now, when they encounter needy people, they experience intense irritation because these people are expressing the very needs that they've had to suppress in themselves. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about projection. We don't just perceive the world objectively, we project our own unconscious contents onto the people and situations around us. And we're especially likely to project onto others the qualities that we've disowned in ourselves. Jung called this shadow projection, seeing in others the darkness that we refuse to see in ourselves. The mechanism works like this. You encounter someone who displays a quality that exists in your shadow. Let's say selfishness, because you've worked hard to not be selfish, because you've built your identity around being generous and selfless. You're highly sensitized to selfishness in others. When you see it, you don't just notice it neutrally. You have an intense emotional reaction. You feel angry, disgusted, or morally outraged. But here's the crucial insight. If selfishness were truly foreign to your nature, if you had no relationship with it in your own psyche, you wouldn't have such an intense reaction. You might notice it, you might disagree with it, but you wouldn't be triggered by it. The intensity of your reaction is proportional to how much that quality lives in your own shadow, unacknowledged and unintegrated. This is why different people are triggered by different things. What enrages you might barely register for someone else, and vice versa. Your triggers are unique to you because they map your unique shadow, the specific qualities, emotions, and aspects of self that you personally have had to repress or disown. Understanding this transforms how you relate to the people who irritate you. Instead of seeing them as problems to be fixed or avoided, you can begin to see them as mirrors reflecting your own unconscious material. Instead of asking, why are they so annoying, you can ask, what is this intense reaction telling me about myself? This doesn't mean that the other person's behavior is acceptable or that you should not have boundaries. Jung wasn't suggesting that you should tolerate toxic behavior or that all criticism is just projection. Some behaviors are genuinely harmful and should be addressed. But even when someone's behavior is objectively problematic, the intensity of your emotional reaction still contains information about your own psyche. For example, someone might genuinely be dishonest, and it's reasonable to avoid trusting them. But if you have an extreme, visceral reaction to their dishonesty, if you feel rage, moral outrage, or obsessive focus on their lying, that intensity suggests that dishonesty touches something in your shadow. Perhaps you've had to suppress your own capacity for deception, even the small, everyday dishonesty that's part of human nature. Your extreme reaction to their dishonesty might be your psyche trying to maintain the fiction that you are purely honest. This is what makes Jung's insight so challenging. It requires holding two truths simultaneously. Yes, the other person might be behaving badly. And yes, your intense reaction reveals something about your own unconscious. Both can be true at once. The goal isn't to excuse others' behavior or to take all the blame on yourself. The goal is to use every trigger as an opportunity for self-knowledge. So how do you actually work with triggers from a Jungian perspective? The first step is to notice when you're being triggered. This seems obvious, but many people are so identified with their reactions that they don't recognize them as triggers. They just think they're responding appropriately to other people's unreasonable behavior. So you must develop enough self-awareness to notice, I'm having an intense reaction right now. This feeling is disproportionate to what's actually happening. The second step is to pause rather than immediately acting on the trigger. When you're triggered, your first impulse is usually to attack, defend, or withdraw. But these reactive responses keep you stuck in the pattern. Instead, take a breath, step back, create some space between the trigger and your response. This pause is where consciousness enters and transformation becomes possible. The third step is to get curious about the trigger rather than judgmental. Instead of condemning yourself for being triggered or condemning the other person for triggering you, approach the situation with genuine curiosity. This is interesting. Why is this particular behavior creating such a strong reaction in me? What might this be revealing about my shadow? The fourth step is to explore your personal history with this quality. When did you first learn that this quality was unacceptable? What happened when you expressed it as a child? How did you learn to suppress or deny it? What price have you paid for disowning this part of yourself? This exploration helps you understand how the shadow material got created and why it's so emotionally charged. The fifth step is to acknowledge and integrate the disowned quality. This doesn't mean acting it out or becoming what you've criticized in others. It means recognizing that this quality exists within you as part of the full spectrum of human nature. It means accepting that you too have capacity for arrogance, neediness, selfishness, dishonesty, irresponsibility, or whatever quality you've been projecting onto others. This integration is what Jung called withdrawing projections. As you reclaim the projected material and acknowledge it as your own, the intensity of your reactions to others begins to diminish. You can still have preferences and boundaries, but you're no longer triggered in the same way because you're no longer fighting against disowned parts of yourself. One of the most profound aspects of this work is discovering that the qualities you've been projecting often contain gifts you've been denying yourself. The person who's triggered by others' confidence might discover their own healthy self-assertion. The person irritated by others' vulnerability might access their own capacity for authentic connection. The person enraged by others' creativity might reclaim their own suppressed creative expression. This is why Jung said that confronting someone with their shadow is actually showing them their own light. The shadow isn't just darkness. It's unlived potential, disowned strengths, repressed authenticity. When you integrate your shadow, you don't just become more self-aware. You become more whole, more alive, more capable of expressing your full humanity. But this work requires tremendous courage because it means releasing your righteous judgments of others. It means admitting that you possess the very qualities you've been criticizing. It means recognizing that the people who irritate you most are actually your greatest teachers because they're showing you exactly what you need to integrate to become whole. Jung understood that this process isn't comfortable. In fact, he said that the encounter with the shadow is one of the most difficult and important tasks in psychological development. It requires what he called moral courage. The willingness to see yourself honestly, including the parts you'd rather deny. It requires abandoning the comfortable fiction that you're entirely good and others are entirely bad. This doesn't mean collapsing into relativism where everything is okay and there's no right or wrong. Jung believed in moral development and ethical behavior, but he understood that true morality can only emerge from wholeness, not from one-sided identification with goodness, while projecting all the badness onto others. Real ethical behavior comes from integrating your shadow and making conscious choices, not from unconsciously reacting against the parts of yourself you've disowned. The most powerful aspect of this work is that it transforms your relationships. When you stop projecting your shadow onto others, when you take responsibility for your own triggers, you become capable of actually seeing other people rather than just seeing your projections on them. This creates the possibility for genuine connection, authentic understanding, and real intimacy. You also become less reactive and more responsive. Instead of automatically defending yourself or attacking others when triggered, you can pause, recognize the projection, withdraw it, and respond from a place of consciousness rather than unconscious reactivity. This doesn't mean you never feel irritation or never set boundaries. It means you're doing so consciously rather than being controlled by unconscious shadow dynamics. Jung believed that this work of recognizing and integrating projections isn't just personal, it's collective. The same dynamics that play out in individual relationships play out on larger scales in groups, communities, and nations. When groups project their collective shadow onto other groups, other races, religions, political parties, nations, the results are prejudice, dehumanization, and violence. This is why Jung said that the most important political and social work we can do is to withdraw our projections. When you stop seeing your shadow in others and start recognizing it in yourself, you stop contributing to the collective dynamics of scapegoating and othering. You become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. But this work must begin at the individual level. You can't change collective shadow dynamics if you haven't done the work of recognizing and integrating your own shadow. And the people who trigger you, those irritating, frustrating, infuriating people, are your greatest teachers in this work. They're showing you, with perfect precision, exactly where your unconscious blind spots are and what aspects of yourself you need to reclaim. This is the profound gift hidden in every trigger. Every irritation is an invitation to greater self-knowledge. Every intense reaction is a roadmap to your shadow. Every difficult person is a mirror reflecting what you need to see in yourself. When you understand this, you stop seeing triggering people as obstacles to your peace and start seeing them as opportunities for your growth. The question becomes, will you accept the teaching? Will you use your triggers as doorways to self-understanding, or will you continue to blame others for your reactions? Will you have the courage to look at what your irritation reveals about you, or will you stay comfortable in the fiction that the problem is always other people? If you've recognized yourself in this exploration, if you've seen how you've been projecting your shadow onto others and letting your triggers control you, then you're ready to begin using your irritations wisely. Write in the comments, "I see my reflection in my triggers," and commit to the practice of withdrawing projections and integrating what they reveal. Share this message with someone who's stuck in reactive patterns. Your triggers are waiting to teach you. Will you finally become their student?